live. And we're live, apparently. We're live. Is that what we were testing? Alive and awake, hopefully. Live in Mount Shasta, in the state of Jefferson.
Oh, we need to straighten the curtains behind you.
Oh dear.
On this side, it's all kind of pulling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
this
it's
is the
the
time of year
far,
where
it's
we
the far
actually
end
need
though. Yeah, down there. That's
okay.
doing weird things.
All right, that's as good as it gets. Yes, live from Mount Shasta in the state of Jefferson, it's Toltec Discussions with Golden Eagle, who is me, your host, supported by my kind and friendly staff. And go ahead and click these cameras, please, or you lose.
Hang on, I'm right in the. I'm not because of these screens. I'm not ready yet.
Okay. Okay. You'll meet my staff momentarily. Technical difficulties. We have a software that's acting up, and nobody knows why. You get to see us, but we can't see you. This is the gist of it. So, we last week started our Warrior series.
Did you want me to?
Yes, show you.
Oh, well, this is Melody and Yvonne.
This is Melody and Yvonne Little Eagle. And then the second button down, you turn that off.
I'm here. Bye.
That's Or You Loose. And then back to me. I'm Golden Eagle. And you see why they put me in front of the camera. Because clearly we don't want you looking at anyone attractive most of the time. Last week, we started our Warrior series based on the premise that in Toltec philosophy and Toltec consciousness work, we have identified that each of us has three core natures: the dreamer, the stalker, and the warrior. And our society right now is really down on the warrior personality, of standing up for yourself, of standing up for what is right, being able to take action, even up to and including the point of violent action if necessary. And throughout history, very few of a very low percentage of the population ever really develops that warrior nature fully. So that's what we're exploring. And before we get into this, I have a couple other announcements that I'm going to make. The first regards Toltec history and philosophy. And it has to do with an article I was invited to write and is being published in a journal called Ancient American, N at the end of the word. It will be in issue 123, which is coming out sometime soon. Issue 122 is out now. It's a quarterly journal. You can find it at ancientamerican.com. The article is entitled, "Who Were the Toltecs? In Search of the Master Craftsman." The first page of the article will actually look like this. I have a proof copy that I was allowed to make comments on, and so I wanted to let you know that's coming up. It's not a journal aimed at much Toltec. I may be the first author to ever write an article about the Toltecs for this journal. It's more about the ancient history of America and how a lot of history and archaeology has been covered up. So I like it. It exposes the truth. The next little announcement I want to make has to do with this stack of books right here.
Yay.
This is entitled "The Roots of Shamanism, A Historical Journey into Your Future written by someone named Golden Eagle. The cover looks like this. And the only place you can get it is here. We will have a little thing up on the website in the next day or two. It actually came earlier than expected, which is why we don't have the website up and running yet. And we will also, of course, be putting it on all our Facebook links. And so I'm going to read to you the back cover text of a little bit of what this is about. This book is not what you think it is. Well, it is a book, but as far as the content goes, no matter what your preconceived notion may be about a book describing the history of shamanism, this isn't it. What it is a slightly irreverent, humorous yet serious approach to finding your spiritual path in a modern world that seems committed to keeping any valid information about spirituality from you, both spirituality in general and shamanism in particular. The vehicle for presenting this information is the Toltec path. Modern academia claims the Toltec culture disappeared from history somewhere around 1000 AD, plus or minus a couple of hundred years, and that is what the world believed, until Toltec men and women of knowledge, called a Nawal in their tradition and a shaman by everyone else, began emerging from hiding in the late 20th century to inform the world that, yes, the Toltecs were alive and well, thank you very much. Furthermore, the Toltecs have a great deal to offer the rest of the world regarding consciousness and the future of humanity. Golden Eagle is trained and initiated into one Toltec lineage. He brilliantly interweaves threads from multiple points of view regarding shamanism in general, the Toltec path in particular, his own calling to the path of shamanism, as well as ways to help you make your next steps on your spiritual journey. No matter what spiritual tradition you may follow, or even if you, like many here in the early 21st century, are just starting a search for a more meaningful approach to the spiritual side of life, you'll be able to find pearls to help you on your path. So that's this book. The retail price is $24.95, and in a special offer being announced to the entire universe right here, right now, for the very first time, the first 10 people who let me know that they want a copy, it's 20% off, or $19.95. So 2 of them are gone. We can write their names down. You don't have to physically drive here. You can message us in one of the usual preferred methods like email or texting, or you could actually do something that is considered radical here in the early mid-21st century. Pick up the phone and call us.
Congratulations on both.
Thank you. Yeah, so the roots of shamanism this is an interesting book. Like I say, it is not what you think it is. I'm going to put those right there. I was going to read a couple other blurbs from it, but I think I'm not. I'm going to get back into what we're intending to talk about tonight. Oh, I need those out. Which is The Book of Five Rings by Miyamoto Musashi. We started talking about this last week. Who remembers the 5 sections of the book, the 5 major sections, which are representative of the 5 rings of which he speaks? You know.
Oh, you want me to answer?
Oh, well,
I figured you were excluding me because I already know, right?
Okay, so what were you raising the hand? Is there a
To
comment?
answer?
Oh.
No, to answer your question.
Oh,
But if
go
I'm
right
not-
ahead.
Okay. It's the 4 elements of spirit, or what he calls the void.
Right. So it's
Earth.
ground or earth, water, fire, and air, and spirit or void. So we were we did a lot of background last week about feudal Japan and Musashi's life, and I'm not going to repeat that here, other than to remind everyone, in an age where it was rare for a samurai to live past 30, he lived to 60, and he fought more battles than literally could be counted, and he never lost. So, we are in the middle of the book called Ground, or Earth. Let me... Glory no Show, Book of Five Rings. And before I do this, I have a note here that I wanted to go through a little bit of Zen philosophy. I think these couple of examples will help you. Will help you understand the mindset of Musashi, and therefore the mindset of the time frame in which he was writing and fighting. There was one of the Zen monasteries. The master gave an instruction to the students that they were to sit in zazen, the quiet, mindless state, for 60 minutes with no interruptions and without thinking about anything. And as usual, they would ring a gong at the start, and they would ring a gong when the time is up. And your job is to sit there and think of nothing until the gong sounds next. So the gong sounded, they did their thing, they concluded, and the master called each of the students in one by one to talk about what their experience was. And one of the students was very excited. Oh, master, it was fabulous. I was meditating and I was thinking of nothing, and then all of a sudden I was connected to the highest state of knowledge in the universe, and I was downloaded all the secrets, and it was amazing and wonderful. And it was so enlightening. I saw all these things and did everything. The master went, did you record that part in your journal? Oh yes, I recorded it. This was the most amazing experience of my life, that I'd finally broken through to the other side, making contact with enlightenment. The master said, no. Did you record in your journal that this meditation was a failure? The student shocked. What do you mean? I made all this contact, but that wasn't the intent of the meditation. Your instruction was to think of nothing for 60 minutes, and you thought of things. So it was a complete failure. So you're going to go back and journal that it was a failure, and then you're going to do it again. Very much related to that, those of us who live here at Glen Haven had occasion this last week to watch a famous movie called The Seven Samurai. It's a Japanese film with English subtitles, filmed in black and white, by world-famous director Akira Kurosawa, starring one of the greatest actors of all time in the samurai movies, Toshiro Mifune, who played Kikichio, one of the least worthy of the samurai in the movie. And one of the most worthy samurai, here's the setup, real short, is these out-of-work samurai who are desperately hungry agreed to work for a village of farmers to defend them from a tribe of 40 bandits who are raiding the village every few months to steal most of their food. And so these samurai are hired to work for them and defend them. And they're badly outnumbered by a count of 40-7 at the start of the war. And one of them, the best fighter by far, sneaks off to go steal one of the 3 guns the bandits have. And he's gone most of the night. And when he comes back, he has one of the guns and reports that he killed 2 of the enemy, and he lays down to sleep. And the young teenager, who's a samurai, maybe 14, no more than 15, he is really impressed. He's talking about the way this man did this to the other samurai there. And And this Kukichio, who's really the bad samurai, he does everything wrong. He's jealous because he hasn't had an opportunity yet in this little war to distinguish himself. So he decides he's going to sneak off and get one of the other gangs and kill some of the other people, which he does. And before he can get back, the bandits happen to mount an attack against the village in the section he was supposed to defend. And a couple of the farmers get killed because he wasn't there. And so he gets chewed out by the head samurai, and it's rather than being a thing of great glory, it turns out to be yet another thing of great shame heaped upon him. Because he didn't do what he was supposed to do. He had an intent, he didn't follow it up, he broke ranks, he wasn't pogging, if you want to use our Toltec party term. He let his team members down, and people died. So that's a little bit of the Zen warrior-like mindset that is in this era of the Book of Five Rings. Here we go. The movie Seven Samurai was set maybe one generation before Musashi was born. So it was maybe 50 plus years before his time. But not much changed in that intervening time. Okay, so in the ground book, we are going to read a section here, it's short, called The Way of Strategy. Like a trooper, the carpenter sharpens his own tools. He carries his equipment in his toolbox and works under the direction of his foreman. He makes columns and girders with an axe, shapes floorboards and shelves with a plane, cuts fine open work and carvings accurately, giving as excellent a finish as his skill will allow. This is the craft of the carpenters. When the carpenter becomes skilled and understands measures, he can become a foreman. The carpenter's attainment is having tools which will cut well, to make small shrines, writing shelves, tables, paper lanterns, chopping boards, and pot lids. These are the specialties of the carpenter. Things are similar for the trooper, meaning the warrior. You ought to think deeply about this. The attainment of the carpenter is that his work is not warped, that the joints are not misaligned, that the work is truly planed so that it meets well and is not merely finished in sections. This is essential. If you want to learn this way, deeply consider the things written in this book one at a time. You must do sufficient research. So he's showing you an instruction that is it's like an archetype. It's like the cookie cutter. It's a formula, if you will. It's not all the answers. It's the formula to find all the answers.
To find the archetype?
This is the formula. In each one of these sections, he's giving us a formula. By example, he's showing us the little detail things the carpenter does with his sharp tool, has to cut well and precisely, right? So keep in mind this was primarily a sword fighting book. You have to have your sword sharpened.
Mm-hmm.
You have to control it to cut finely and accurately, and so forth. Mm-hmm. So there's ways. And so in terms of training your mind as a warrior, you have to keep it sharpened and honed, the mind sharpened and honed. You have to learn to be precise and accurate and detailed. And as we talked last week, there's timing involved in all of that. Okay, so this next section was one that I read last week, the outline of the 5 books. We're not going to repeat that. There's a section here on how he named his one school, two swords. That's the name of his school. I'm not going to read that. I am going to read this section. The benefit of the two characters reading strategy. Masters of the long sword are called strategists. As for the other military arts, those who master the bow are called archers. Those who master the spear are called spearmen. Those who master the gun are called marksmen. Those who master the halberd are called halberdiers. But we do not call masters of the way of the longsword longswordsmen, nor do we speak of companion swordsmen. Remember the long sword and the companion sword. Because bows, guns, spears, and halberds are all warriors' equipment, they are certainly part of strategy. To master the virtue of the longsword is to govern the world and oneself. Thus, the long sword is the basis of strategy. The principle is strategy by means of the long sword. If he attains the virtue of the long sword, one man can beat 10 men. Just as one man can beat 10, so 100 men can beat 1,000, and 1,000 can beat 10,000. In my strategy, one man is the same as 10,000, so this strategy is the complete warrior's craft. Remember, over here he said, the principle is strategy by means of the long sword. It doesn't say necessarily just skill with the long sword. If you study everything about the long sword, you have to learn every aspect of military strategy, is what he's implying here. And so applying that to your own mind and consciousness is, by studying his strategy, you will learn everything you need to have the door opened for the warrior's mindset to come into you.
Mm.
Okay. I'm not going to read this section. It's called The Benefit of Weapons in Strategy. I read a portion of this last section, and tonight I'm going to read the whole thing. It's called Timing in Strategy. There is timing in everything. Timing in strategy cannot be mastered without a great deal of practice. Remember what I said about personal practice?
Mm-hmm.
I don't care about your personal theory. I care about your personal practice. Timing is important in dancing and pipe or string music, for they are in rhythm only if timing is good. Timing and rhythm are also involved in the military arts, shooting bows and guns, and riding horses. In all skills and ability, there is timing. There is also timing in the void. There is timing in the whole life of the warrior, in his thriving and declining, in his harmony and discord. Similarly, there is timing in the way of the merchant, in the rise and fall of capital. All things entail rising and falling timing. You must be able to discern this. In strategy, there are various timing considerations. From the outset, you must know the applicable timing and the inapplicable timing. And from the large and small things and the fast and slow timings, find the relevant timing. First, seeing the distance timing and the background timing. This is the main thing in strategy. It is especially important to know the background timing, otherwise your strategy will become uncertain. You win in battles with the timing in the void, born of the timing of cunning, by knowing the enemy's timing, and thus using a timing which the enemy does not expect. All the 5 books are chiefly concerned with timing. You must train sufficiently to appreciate all this. If you practice day and night in the above Ichi school strategy, your spirit will naturally broaden. Thus is large-scale strategy and the strategy of hand-to-hand combat propagated in the world. This is recorded for the first time in the 5 books of ground, water, fire, wind, and void. This is the way for men who want to learn my strategy. Now you have to remember, in his day, only men were warriors for the most part. Women warriors were scarce. So replace the word men with anyone who wants to learn his strategy. Because humans. Because even before his time, in other parts of the world, like Scotland,
well, this Viking warrior chief
Scandinavia.
that I was talking about, she was like from 800 AD. So.
Yeah, there were lots of women warriors, other than in feudal Japan where women pretty much weren't allowed to be. So, after that, we go into his list of 9 aspects of his strategy. Do you have them all remembered?
Yes.
1, do not think dishonestly. 2, the way is in training.
Slow down. Okay.
3, become acquainted with every art. 4, know the ways of all professions. 5, distinguish between gain and loss in worldly matters. 6, develop intuitive judgment and understanding for everything.
Can you repeat that, please?
Develop intuitive judgment and understanding for everything. 7, perceive those things which cannot be seen. He's paying homage to the energy right there. 8, pay attention even to trifles. And possibly my favorite, number 9, do nothing which is of no use.
What was the second to last one? Do nothing was the last one.
Pay attention even to trifles. Okay, continuing on in the timing and strategy section.
There was just 9.
Yeah.
Say again?
9
There was just
aspects.
9 points.
9. Exactly. It is important to start setting these broad principles in your heart and train in the way of strategy. If you do not look at things on a large scale, it will be difficult for you to master strategy. If you learn and attain this strategy, you will never lose, even to 20 or 30 enemies. More than anything to start with, you must set your heart on strategy and earnestly stick to the way. You will come to be able to actually beat men in fights and to be able to win with your eye. Also, by training, you will be able to freely control your own body, conquer men with your body, and with sufficient training, you will be able to beat 10 men with your spirit. When you have reached this point, will it not mean that you are invincible? Moreover, in large-scale strategy, the superior man will manage many subordinates dexterously, bear himself correctly, govern the country, and foster the people, thus preserving the ruler's discipline.
Can you give those 4 points again?
Moreover, in large-scale strategy, the superior man will manage many subordinates dexterously, bear himself correctly, govern the country, and foster the people, thus preserving the ruler's discipline. If there is a way involving spirit of not being defeated to help oneself and gain honor, it is the way of strategy. This is signed the 2nd year of Shoho, or 1645, the 5th month, the 12th day, by Shingen Musashi, or Miyamoto Musashi. And all these books are addressed to his student, Teruo Maganojo. Sorry, not Spanish, it's Japanese. That is the groundbook. It lays the groundwork, as he said last week, or I read last week, as if a map was drawn on the ground for where we have to go with everything else. Anybody have any questions about this ground book before we move into the water book? Any comments you want to make about strategy and the warrior philosophy so far?
Regarding the 9 points, intuition, judgment, and understanding for everything, and then also paying attention even to the trifles.
Right.
I think this is really clear that we have to be awake all the time.
Yeah.
There's there's really no downtime. So even when you're having a casual dinner or getting together with friends or something, there needs to be some level of your second attention that's placed on these principles. Otherwise you're vulnerable, and it gives us this false sense of security that we can just let down and take things back to a ground or a normal.
Right.
So.
Yeah, that's important to maintain that attitude. The samurai warriors, and no good warrior anywhere is ever off. We're never off duty, ever. In the movie version of the novel Shogun, which was about an Englishman who ends up in Japan. It's based on a true story in the samurai era. And there's one scene where there's a samurai who's not well liked, but they're having dinner and they're drinking sake and everybody's getting drunk. And this drunk samurai is able to pick up his bow right there in the dinner, sitting around the dinner table, and shooting through 2 layers of the those rice paper screens, which were the walls of the house, not seeing his target. He puts 3 arrows within a group this big in a post that's outside. Boom, boom, boom.
Drunk.
While he's drunk and he can't see them. Because he was so aware of his surroundings that he knew where it was. Boom, boom, boom. He told the English guy, go look. And the English guy goes looking right there. And so the English guy, as a sign of respect, he orders his household, leave them there to show what this guy is capable of. And this Englishman actually does go on to become considered a samurai. Okay, that's part of the story there. So, before we go into the next book, who's online?
1 second.
Can you repeat number 9 as the aspect of strategy, just so I make
Do nothing which is of no use.
And then Will's asking what the number 2 was, but I'm asking if that was in the 9. That was
So
training.
in training.
Yeah.
Going back. Number 1, do not think dishonestly. Number 2, the way is in training. 3, become acquainted with every art. 4, know the ways of all professions. 5, distinguish between gain and loss in worldly matters. 6, develop intuitive judgment and understanding for everything. 7, perceive those things which cannot be seen. 8, pay attention even to trifles. And 9, do nothing which is of no use. Let's talk just a moment about this gain or loss in worldly matters. In the movie The Seven Samurai, the samurai arrive, and it's a typical village at the base of some steep hills / low mountains. And there's streams and all this, and so they're, okay, how are we going to defend this? It's wide open, you can ride in from any direction. So they decide, okay, we need to put a fence here on this road, we're going to build a moat here, we're going to flood that field over there, and so they plan their defenses. And they looked at the defensive perimeter, the layout of the village, and they realized that the mill and 2 of the houses or 3 of the houses are so far outside the rest of the village, they can't be saved. So they said, okay, we're going to cut our losses, we're going to build a wall here, and all you people have to move out and come in here. And they're all up in arms. These are peasant farmers, and oh, they're in tears. And he says, look, we're not going to risk 25 houses for those 3. We're not going to risk people's lives for those 3 houses which you can rebuild next year. This is war. We have to cut our losses. So that's gain or loss. And of course, the mill is the home of the old village patriarch, who's probably 90 or 100 years old, walks like this, all bent over with his stick, and he has always wanted to die in his home right there. So he decides to stay there when the bandits are coming, and the people go to try and get him out, his relatives, and then the bandits come, and they all get killed, and all the houses get burned. So it's an example that gain or loss, just the old man wants to die there, let him die there. He can die with honor defending his home, right? And everybody else should have stayed here, and 3 fewer people would have died, and the houses were going anyway. So there's an example. You got to cut your losses and say, have fun building a house next year. Okay, any other?
Did you want the people online?
People online.
Okay, so William is with us.
Hi, William.
Hi.
Mohadib.
Wadid.
Hi, Lucky.
Lonnie, I hope you're feeling better, Lonnie.
Yeah, get over your pneumonia, Lonnie.
And Maria
Hi,
Yeah.
Maria.
and Miss Nina.
Hi,
Miss
Nina.
Nina.
Patricia is tuning in from home.
Hi,
Okay, hi,
Patricia.
Patricia.
And I think that's it
That's it?
Yeah.
Okay. All
And
right.
we have, I think, at least 7 of the 10 books
Okay.
spoken for.
7 of the 10. So we're down to 3 that get the special offer. Okay, moving right along. This is the water book. And this isn't the longest of the 5 books, but it's probably the second longest. And I'm not going to read the whole thing. We don't have time. And then you would miss the fun when you go get your own copy of this. The spirit of the Niten Ichi School of Strategy is based on water. And this water book explains methods of victory as the long sword form of the Ichi school. Language does not extend to explaining the way in detail, but it can be grasped intuitively. So you have to open your mind to receive. Study this book. Read a word, then ponder it. If you interpret the meaning loosely, you will mistake the way. If you interpret the meaning loosely, you will mistake the way. He's being as blatant as he can at telling you exactly what you need to do here. The principles of strategy are written down here in terms of single combat, but you must think broadly so that you attain an understanding of, for 10,000 aside, battles. Strategy is different from other things in that if you mistake the way even a little, you'll become bewildered and fall into bad ways. If you merely read this book, you will not reach the way of strategy. Absorb the things written here. Absorb the things written in this book. Do not just read, memorize, or imitate, but so that you realize the principle from within your own heart. Study hard to absorb these things into your body. That's the intro to the water book. And this next little section, which I will read, is called Spiritual Bearing in Strategy.
Spiritual
Bearing in Strategy.
Thank you.
In strategy, your spiritual bearing must not be any different from normal. Both in fighting and in everyday life, you should be determined though calm. Meet the situation without tenseness, yet not recklessly. Your spirit settled, yet unbiased. Even when your spirit is calm, do not let your body relax. And when your body is relaxed, do not let your spirit slacken. So neither is completely off. There's always a little bit of tension. The bow is strung, just the arrow is not, with just ever so slightly amount of pressure on it. And that's the physical and mental state you should be in. And then from here to shooting is one motion, right? Boom. You pull and let go, and you look focused on the target, and boom. There's actually a very good book. I don't have it. It's called Zen and the Art of Archery. It'd be a good one to get. Do not let your spirit be influenced by your body, or your body be influenced by your spirit. Be neither insufficiently spirited nor over-spirited. An elevated spirit is weak, and a low spirit is weak. Do not let your enemy see your spirit. Small people must be completely familiar with the spirit of large people, and large people must be completely familiar with the spirit of small people. Whatever your size, do not be misled by the reactions of your own body. With your spirit open and unconstricted, look at things from a high point of view. You must cultivate your wisdom and spirit. Polish your wisdom. Learn public justice. Distinguish between good and evil. Study the ways of different arts one by one. When you cannot be deceived by men, you will have realized the wisdom of strategy. The wisdom of strategy is different from other things. On the battlefield, even when you are hard pressed, you should ceaselessly research the principles of strategy so that you can develop a steady spirit. Here's a section I like. The gaze in strategy. The gaze should be large and broad. This is the twofold gaze, perception and sight. Perception is strong and sight weak. In strategy, it is important to see distant things as if they were close, and to take a distant view of close things. It is important in strategy to know the enemy's sword and not to be distracted by insignificant movements of his sword. You must study this. The gaze is the same for single combat and for large-scale strategy. It is necessary in strategy to be able to look to both sides without moving the eyeballs.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot master this ability quickly. Learn what is written here. Use this gaze in everyday life and do not vary it whatever happens. I'm trying to get Miyamoto's stern voice going.
Sounds like the Dreamer's show.
That's exactly what I was
that's
hoping somebody would figure out.
I got that right away.
Yeah, this is the dreamer's stare.
I didn't want to interrupt.
Exactly. You're using your peripheral vision, you're focused on nothing, but you're taking in everything.
Mm-hmm.
You can see subtle movements, and the part of your attention is focused on that which is important.
So, in other words, the sword's going all over the place, but keep that
Right.
gaze.
Yeah, you keep that gaze, and
It
you
allows
learn
you to see all.
that these kind of motions to make the sword go, the sword tip, the kisaki, as it's called,
Mm-hmm.
this kind of motion is distracting. You have to look at the whole body. You can't strike without moving the body and the arms, and that's what you take in and counter.
So you don't fight the sword, you fight the body.
You're fighting the man. Yeah. You're not fighting the sword tip. The sword tip is what could kill you, but you're still not fighting the sword tip. You have to see the essence of things. Holding the long sword, footwork, the 5 attitudes. This I'm going to read. It's a short section, and it's important. The 5 attitudes are upper, middle, lower, right side, and left side. These are the 5. Although attitude has these 5 divisions, the one purpose of all of them is to cut the enemy. There are none but these 5 attitudes, says the guy who lived twice as long as any other samurai and never lost. Pay attention. Whatever attitude you are in, Do not be conscious of making the attitude. Think only of cutting. Your attitude should be large or small depending on the situation.
Can you explain that first? About not concentrating, that you should only be
Let me
concentrating.
finish the whole
Okay.
section. It's
Okay,
only a couple small paragraphs.
okay.
Your attitude should be large or small according to the situation. Upper, lower, and middle attitudes are decisive. Left and right side attitudes are fluid. Left and right attitudes should be used if there is an obstruction overhead or to one side. The decision to use left or right depends on the place. The essence of the way is this. To understand attitude, you must thoroughly understand the middle attitude. The middle attitude is the heart of attitudes. If we look at strategy on a broad scale, the middle attitude is the seat of the commander, with the other four attitudes following the commander. You must appreciate this. So the use of the word attitude here is slightly different than we would normally use it. It's think of that word attitude as being, as he uses it, as being synonymous with both direction and an approach. He's talking about where the attacks come and where you can make an attack. Upper, middle, straight on at the heart. Lower, taking out legs. Coming at them from the right, or your left. That's why he said which attitude you use depends on the location. If you're in a low-hanging ceiling, you can't use the upper attitude because your sword will get hung up in the rafters. If there's a tree right here, you're not going to go this way, and the other guy knows it. Right?
So he'll use the tree.
So he will try to pin you against the tree, so you need to move.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that's really what they're going for here, is whatever attitude you're in, do not be conscious of making the attitude. Think only of cutting. You can't, he's also warning you right there. Don't get enamored of always using the same attack or the same defense. You have to be adaptable. Because if you can only do one thing, you become what we call a one-trick pony.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like another word that could be used for attitude would be your approach.
Yeah, that's
And that you know, to not get focused on the approach, but on the end result, which is the cutting in this particular case.
Yeah.
And so it was interesting. There was one part in this novel that we're reading that where one of the high commanders was watching one of his students who, you know, has some really awesome martial arts moves and stuff, and he saw where it was a move that he had practiced many times but had never used, and he was watching this kid do it, and it was particularly, it was meant to just immediately take him out no matter what, just and for more than one opponent. So there's one kid up against two people, and he's was watching him do this move, and just really appreciating the beauty of the fact that this move was being used to do what it was meant to do, but it was not a move that he had ever seen or done himself because he had never needed it. So it was an approach that could be used, but it's not an approach you used anytime, and it really wasn't about the approach, but it was about the end results, which was to take out his opponents as quickly as possible.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's a great example. Yeah. Okay, so what I also wanted to say about this section is he said the middle attitude is basically the key. That's going straight to the heart, right?
The heart of the matter.
It's the heart of the manner, but also the heart of the opponent. And you get somebody in the heart, and the fight's over. You nick them in the leg or the arm, it might slowly bleed them, and it might reduce their mobility, but it may not take them out.
Right.
You go for the heart, it takes them out. So that's why I said everything else revolves around that. And in a large scale attack, he says the heart, the middle way, corresponds to the seat of the commander in a large army. You take out the commander, you take out the head of the beast, and everything else will slowly unravel. And you're much more likely to win. All right. There's the next section, one of the next sections. Which one of these two do I want to read? Well, anyway, not the next section, but the one after is actually called The 5 Approaches.
Okay.
Which talks about the attitudes, and it's in very detail, and it's very sword related. It talks about if you do this and he does that, then cut the arm, and things like that. So I'm going to let you guys read that on your own. I'm going to read this section. It's called The Way of the Long Sword. Knowing the way of the long sword means we can wield with 2 fingers the sword we usually carry. If we know the path of the sword well, we can wield it easily. If you try to wield the long sword quickly, you will mistake the way. To wield the long sword well, you must wield it calmly. If you try to wield it quickly, like a folding fan or a short sword, you will err by using short sword chopping. You cannot cut a man with a long sword using this method. When you have cut downwards with the long sword, lift it straight upwards. When you cut sideways, return the sword along a sideways path. Return the sword in a reasonable way, always stretching the elbows broadly. Wield the sword strongly. This is the way of the long sword. If you learn to use the 5 approaches of my strategy, you will wield a sword well. You must train constantly. Then he goes into the 5 approaches. I'm going to skip a couple pages here. He then goes into a series of different specific attacks. Remember, this is the water book talking about the flow and the essence of his timing. So there's a lot here about specific techniques. The flowing water cut. The flowing water cut is used when you are struggling blade to blade with the enemy. When he breaks and quickly withdraws, trying to spring with his long sword, extend your body and spirit and cut him as slowly as possible with your long sword, following your body like stagnant water. You can cut with certainty if you learn this. You must discern the enemy's grade, how proficient he is. Question.
So it seems like if you're extending your body, and the sword, I'm assuming, goes with that. When he's talking about spirit, it's almost like sending energy along with it.
Yeah, He is using the term spirit for energy all through here. He has a lot more different strikes and parries, to stab at the face, to stab at the heart, the smacking parry. Yeah, so this is really good stuff, and it requires that second half of the water book there really requires you to spend time with it. Next is the fire book. In this, the fire book of the Nito Ichi School of Strategy, I describe fighting as fire. In the first place, people think narrowly about the benefit of strategy. By using only their fingertips, they only know the benefit of 3 of the 5 inches of the wrist. They let a contest be decided, as with the folding fan, merely by the span of their forearms. They specialize in a small manner of dexterity, learning such trifles as hand and leg movements with the bamboo practice sword. In my strategy, the training for killing enemies is by way of many contests, fighting for survival, discovering the meaning of life and death, learning the way of the sword, judging the strength of attacks, and understanding the way of the edge and ridge of the sword. You cannot profit from small techniques, particularly when full armor is worn. My way of strategy is the sure method to win when fighting for your life, one man against 5 or 10. There is nothing wrong with the principle, one man can beat 10, so 1,000 men can beat 10,000. You must research this. Of course, you cannot assemble 1,000 or 10,000 men for everyday training. But you can become a master of strategy by training alone with a sword, so that you can understand the enemy's stratagems, his strength and resources, and come to appreciate how to apply strategy to beat 10,000 enemies. Any man who wants to master the essence of my strategy must research diligently, training morning and evening. Thus can he polish his skill, become free from self, and realize extraordinary ability. He will come to possess miraculous power. This is the practical result of strategy. So, here in the fire book, he goes on, there's a section here called Depending on the Place, where you examine your environment, how to approach an enemy based on what's around you. The 3 methods to forestall the enemy. The first is to forestall him by attacking. Another is to forestall him as he attacks. The other method is when you and the enemy attack together. There are no methods of taking the lead other than these 3. Because you can win quickly by taking the lead, it is one of the most important things in strategy. There are several things involved in taking the lead. You must make the best of the situation. see through the enemy's spirit so that you grasp his strategy and defeat him. It is impossible to write about this in detail, so you've got to train enough with your mind. Remember, I'm primarily getting you open to the idea of training your mind. If any of you ever want to go on and study the actual martial art, and especially the sword, fine. But it's the mind that's a matter. Everything he's said through this whole book, and we're 3/4 of the way through it, has been training your mind most of all. How to attack first, how to attack second, how to attack third. Here's a section I'm going to read. To become the enemy means to think yourself into the enemy's position. In the world, people tend to think of a robber trapped in a house as a fortified enemy. However, if we think of becoming the enemy, we feel that the whole world is against us and that there is no escape. He who is shut inside is a pheasant. He who enters to arrest is a hawk. You must appreciate this. There was a scene near the beginning of the Seven Samurai film where the peasant farmers who've gone off to try and find a samurai to hire, and they've been turned down by everyone that they've approached, and there's lots of them around because there's a lot of samurai out of work. In the little village, a robber runs into a house and has taken a small child hostage. And that happened yesterday, and now it's today, and they're in there, and they're hungry. And so a samurai, one of the older guys, he becomes the commander in the movie, he decides he's going to end this. So samurai have a very particular hairstyle. It includes long hair put up in a top knot. And so he orders the people to bring him a priest's robe, and then he shaves his head. And that would be shocking for a samurai to have his head shaved. But he does it. And so then he goes up, and under the guise of being a priest to bring food to the robber and the kid, he puts the food in, and when the robber's distracted, he runs in and kills him. So it's just like this book says. If you're the robber in a house, you're trapped. You know, you're absolutely trapped. So becoming the enemy. In large-scale strategy, people are always under the impression that the enemy is strong and so tend to become cautious. But if you have good soldiers and if you understand the principles of strategy and you know how to beat the enemy, there is nothing to worry about. In single combat, you must put yourself in the enemy's position. If you think here is a master of the way who knows the principles of strategy, then you will surely lose. You must consider this deeply. A lot more specific techniques here he lists. To throw into confusion. This means making the enemy lose resolve. In large-scale strategy, we can use our troops to confuse the enemy on the field. Observing the enemy's spirit, we can make him think here, there, like that, like this, slow, fast. Victory is certain when the enemy is caught up in a rhythm which confuses his spirit. In single combat, we can confuse the enemy by attacking with varied techniques when the chance arises. Feinte, thrust, or cut, or make the enemy think you are going to close with him, and when he is confused, you can easily win. This is the essence of fighting. You must research it deeply. I'm going to go back to that. In battles, when the armies are in confrontation, attack the enemy's strong points, and when you see they are beaten back, quickly separate and attack yet another strong point on the periphery of this force. The spirit of this is like a winding mountain path. This is an important fighting method for one man against many. Strike down the enemies in one quarter or drive them back, then grasp the timing and attack further strong points to right and left, as if on a winding mountain path, weighing up the enemy's disposition. When you know the enemy's level, attract strongly with no trace of retreating spirit. In single combat too, use this spirit to deal with the enemy's strong points. What is meant by mingling is the spirit of advancing and becoming engaged with the enemy and not withdrawing even one step. You must understand this. He says that a lot. Okay. I think we're going to go into the Wind book. The Wind book, I'm not going to say that much about. This is about all the other strategies other than Musashi's and how to assess your enemies. And he's using the long sword and how they use the feet. And so I'm going to read just a couple of sections here. In strategy, I'm going to take a drink of tea actually first. In strategy, you must know the ways of other schools. So I have written about various other traditions of strategy in this, the Wind book. Without knowledge of the ways of other schools, it is difficult to understand the essence of my Ichi school. Looking at other schools, we find some that specialize in techniques of strength using extra long swords. Some schools study the way of the short swords, known as the kodachi. Some schools teach dexterity in large numbers of sword techniques, teaching attitudes of the sword as the surface and the way as the interior. That none of these are the true way, I show clearly in the interior of this book, all the vices and virtues and rights and wrongs. My Ichi school is different. Other schools make accomplishments their means of livelihood, growing flowers and decoratively coloring articles in order to sell them. This is definitely not the way of strategy. Some of the world's strategists are concerned only with sword fencing and limit their training to flourishing the long sword and carriage of the body. But is dexterity alone sufficient to win? This is not the essence of the way. I have recorded the unsatisfactory points of other schools one by one in this book. You must study these matters deeply to appreciate the benefit of my Nito Ichi school. So he goes on, and he's got a number of other sword fighting philosophies here on how they use timing and speed and feet positions. And I'm not going to read that. I am not being called to read this right now.
I have a question.
1492? Oh, wrong answer. Okay.
When he's talking about you don't limit your training to train with the long and the
Right.
short sword. So for us, not to limit your training in the katawa is,
What is your question?
well, how would it be training, say in this example with the long and short sword? So the katawa that we would train with many things?
He's basically has said several times in several ways, you have to learn everything. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Don't limit yourself to only learning the long sword. Don't limit yourself to only learning the short sword. Don't try to use the long sword with short sword techniques. Don't try to use the short sword with long sword techniques.
Mm-hmm.
Use the right tool for the right job with the right technique and learn everything. There's an old expression from Europe called a jack of all trades and a master of none, which means you have a certain level of proficiency with a lot of different things, but you're not great at any of them. What Musashi is saying is become great at all of them. Become a master of all trades.
Okay, thank you.
And then that said, I would think that the in one way the Kadwa is your power, but it's not generic. I mean, it is generic. You can use it in 100 different ways.
Right.
You know, if you're right now your only power with the energy is to use it as a healing tool, then master that and move on to another way of using the energy.
And master each thing
Yeah.
that each.
Like cooking and carpentry and martial arts.
And practice with it and train with it.
Okay. We are now going to move into the Book of the Void. It is the shortest book of the 5 books in the Book of 5 Rings.
Can you just go back long enough to give us a quick summary of what the wind is? You know, in other words, you kind of just mentioned a few things, but you didn't really give it. I mean, and I know the other night you gave us kind of the essence of each one, but.
Okay, let me go back to that section.
Because each one you've kind of said, okay, this equals this, so that there's a nice correspondence for us to understand.
And
The
what
wind
the
book.
water, what the water equals too.
Okay.
Said that.
Fourthly, the wind book.
Mm-hmm.
This book is not concerned with my Ichi school, but with other schools of strategy. By wind, I mean old traditions, present day traditions, and family traditions of strategy. Thus, I clearly explain the strategy of the worlds. This is tradition. He also calls it the tradition book.
Okay.
But he associates it with wind, and
Okay.
and because it's what everybody else does wrong, I kind of equate that with somebody being full of hot air. It is difficult to know yourself if you do not know others. So it's basically, you have to know the strategy your enemy is most likely to use. Is the principle behind the wind book. So he's teaching us the strategies of other schools because that's what people are mostly going to run up against. That was the purpose of the wind book.
Okay.
Now we move on to the book of the void. Think of this as the spirit element. The Nito Ichi way of strategy is recorded in this, the book of the void. What is called the spirit of the void is where there is nothing. It is not included in man's knowledge. Of course, the void is nothingness. By knowing things that exist, you can know that which does not exist. This is the void. People in this world look at things mistakenly and think that what they do not understand must be the void. This is not the true void. It is bewilderment. In the way of strategy, also, those who study as warriors think that whatever they cannot understand in their craft is the void. This is not the true void. To obtain the way of strategy as a warrior, you must study fully other martial arts and not deviate even a little from the way of the warrior. With your spirit settled, accumulate practice day by day and hour by hour. Polish the twofold spirit, heart, and mind, and sharpen the twofold gaze, perception, and sight. When your spirit is not in the least clouded, and when the clouds of bewilderment clear away, there is the true void.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So is he saying, learn martial arts, but apply these techniques to it? Learn the ways of others,
Yeah.
but apply these special techniques to
Right.
that.
Apply his whole strategy to everything you do.
Okay.
Is the essence. Until you realize the true way, whether in Buddhism or in common sense, you may think that things are correct and in order. However, if we look at things objectively, from the viewpoint of laws of the world, we see various doctrines departing from the true way. Know well the spirit, and with forthrightness as the foundation and the true spirit as the way, and act strategy broadly, correctly, and openly. Then you will come to think of things in a wide sense, and taking the void as the way, you will see the way as void. In the void is virtue and no evil. Wisdom has existence. Principle has existence. The way has existence. Spirit is nothingness. 12th day of the 5th month, 2nd year of Shoho, 1645. Signed by Shinmen Musashi.
The void is virtue, and what else?
Oh, I closed the book. I don't know. The void is virtue and no evil.
Void.
Wisdom has existence. Principle has existence. The way has existence. Spirit is nothingness. And that is his book of the void. As I said, it's the shortest book in the book of 5 rings of the 5. Do we have any questions online? No questions online?
Well, give them time, there's lagging.
Oh.
So is the void sort of like what the Hindus call the neti neti place?
Kind of. The way I know the void, it's a state that you achieve this state of nothingness. There's no consciousness, there's no awareness of yourself. You're aware that you're aware, but you don't necessarily have any memory.
So you're in the zone.
Yeah, you could call it that.
Totally that.
There's a line, a few lines from the ABD, which summarize this exactly. Now I am experiencing the clear light of objective reality. Nothing is happening, nothing ever has happened, or ever will happen. My present sense of self, is that the next line? Is in reality.
Voyager.
Okay, say that.
My present sense of self, the Voyager, is in reality the void itself, having no qualities or characteristics.
That is a good summary. And there's a particular place on the tree of life that corresponds to that state of consciousness. And when you experience it the first time, you, having read that and heard that now, hopefully you will recognize it. If you experience that state the first time and you've not been trained to recognize it, there's a possibility that fear can snap you out of it. Oh my God, what is this, am I dying? That you won't realize that at first because you won't know who you are. So the goal of this training that Musashi is talking about is to be able to train enough to induce that state at will and maintain just enough of your consciousness that you can control and respond in your fight, but you don't have a fear of death.
So it's sort of like you're in a state of creation and your hand spirit just is...
I wouldn't call it that.
Doing the sword fighting.
No, it's...
You are that.
Yeah.
You become that.
Right.
You're not in a state of creation per se. I disagree with that.
Well, I was just wondering if I was trying to find the correlation.
No, that's not
Okay.
accurate. Okay.
Okay.
It's completely different. You'll have to ponder that.
Okay.
To borrow Musashi's.
Well, when you were describing the void from his perspective and talking about what it's not,
Mm-hmm.
it made me think about, a lot of times when we're working with a guru or a teacher, we want to have that sense of understanding. So with our mind, we're trying to compare things to this, that, and the other, and we get the sense that we know, and we have that information, and we're connected to these higher things. And yet, our teachers will constantly be knocking the stool out from under us to say, no, that's not it. That's not it. Because I think it was when he was specifically talking about these things not being knowable even, but not in a way of bewilderment. It's not like you don't know it because you're just confused. It's because you realize that it's unknowable, and you're then becoming one with that. And as you become one with the unknown, you become that voidness of the void.
Become the void.
Yeah. And in some ways,
Okay.
what we're losing is Yvonne. You know,
Right.
Yvonne needs to get out of the way and allow your higher spirit, you know, to
Right.
work. But it's, I think where we were off with the creation is that this is not being created in the moment. This is discipline. This is something we've done over and over and over. So a lot of the terms in the ABD speak to this when they talk about your body of habits. You know, your body of habits will get you through. So if you're used to doing these routines over and over and over again,
Mm-hmm.
in that moment, you're going to have all of that to draw on, but not with the mind, but with the discipline, with the oneness, with that still point.
Right. Exactly. That still point. In the novels that you mentioned, very early on, the main character, the one who used to be a sheep herder, when he was learning archery from his father, he talked about that still point. That's the state we're going for. Okay, what I'm going to do the next several times is we are going to close with a Zen koan taken from this book that I have called The Warrior Koans, Early Zen in Japan. And so I'm going to read one, and then you guys get to go off and ponder it. This is Zen koan, or Warrior Koan number 44. Wielding the spear with hands empty. Nanjo Masatomo, a master of the spear, was at Kenchoji to worship. Kenchoji is one of the major Zen temples in that era. And afterwards spoke with priest Jyo about using a spear on horseback. Jyo said, "Your Honor is indeed well versed in the art of the spear. But until you have known the state of wielding the spear with hands empty, you will not penetrate to the ultimate secret of the art." Nanjo said, "What do you mean?" The teacher said, "No spear in the hands, no hands on the spear." The spearmaster did not understand. The teacher said further, "If you don't understand, your art of the spear is a little affair of the hands alone." Go ahead.
Okay.
No, go ahead.
Oh, it kind of reminds me, and I don't remember the context, whether it was something that Tamra had shared with us, or whether it was something that came up in one of the EJ visits that we had. But I was pretty sure it was her describing it, that because he knows actually how to walk a tightrope, he could talk about it and explain and demonstrate tightrope walking. Because he was actually doing it, whether or not he was on a tightrope or not. So it had nothing to do with, you know, trying to mimic or show how this would be if I was really on a tightrope. While he was demonstrating on the floor, he was actually on a tightrope. So he was in that moment. He was part of that. And so it wasn't a separate thing. So that's just kind of what came to me with the, you know, it's knowing that relationship of the hand and the spear and the throw and all those things. But the separate parts aren't it. Anyway, we're supposed to be pondering that. So
okay,
They
so
become one with the sword
there's a further story here.
or spear.
In December of 1256, Fukuzumi Hideyomi, a government official, was given the cone wielding the spear with hands empty. He wrestled furiously with this without being able to attain the state. And one evening he paced to and fro many times between the outer hall of Kenshoji and the approach to the teacher's room until he was exhausted. He quietly crept into a little grotto near the hall and repeated again and again, empty hands, which is karate, 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 the art. However, a monk who was doing a punishment sitting, to sit all night in meditation posture for having broken a monastery rule, the monk overheard Hideyomi when in his meditation, and he said, karate, karate, and he thought it was kanedase, kanedase, give some money, give some money. He thought it was a robber and raised the alarm. The priest with the office of jikijitsu, that's the defense guy, and others made a quick search round the hall and caught Hideyomi. At that time, Hideyomi was very ill with tuberculosis of the lungs, and moreover, in his absorption with the cone, he had forgotten to eat for several days, so that his flesh was wasted and his bones weak, and his body on the verge of death. The Jikijitsu Chiko hit him on the back and said, "Let not this heart be set on any place," and gave a katsu shout. That's kind of like a kiai in martial arts.
What's a kiai?
It's a very loud shout that contains all your energy. It focuses your attention and strikes fear into the heart of the enemy, and if done correctly, can kill them. Okay, and gave a katsu shout. Hideyomi nodded and then quietly died. So the tests of this koan are: how is it to wield a spear with hands empty? What has the phrase about not setting a heart have to do with the empty hands koan? So that's the questions you get to ponder. So, here endeth the lesson for today. Are there any questions or comments?
I just wanted to recommend some of these novels that I've read because I've been reading them for decades, and they've taught me a lot of these things because there's a lot of battle information in there, but there's and strategy, but not just on the battlefield, the intrigue, behind the scenes as well. And so, in general, is the Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time, and then any of the historical fiction novels by Stephen Lawhead and Morgan Llewellyn. And so if that's okay, I was going to put that on here for them.
Yeah, that is absolutely fine. I highly recommend the Wheel of Time series. It's under the guise of being a science fiction fantasy novel series. It's actually an instruction manual for our time. And I'll let you figure out the rest. Any other questions or comments from our online audience?
Nina said several times, super awesome material, loved it, thank you. So
that's what I'm here for, is to deliver super awesome material to you all. That's my whole reason of existence. That and to train you up to be a Toltec party, so everybody in the group has mastered the warrior skills and the warrior state of mind, so then we can start to really work and do something. And if you want to know the kinds of things we might someday do, go read the Robert Jordan Wheel of Time series in your copious amounts of spare time. You did sleep last year, right? Okay, the roots of shamanism. 7 of the top 10 have been spoken for with my special offer. The other 3 are still available. for the 20% off. It's normally 25. 20% off means 20. So let me know. Let us know. Send an email, a text, call. You can actually come visit us here in Mount Shasta and claim those. But hurry, because there's only 3 left, and the offer's only been on the table for an hour and a half. So they're going quickly.
We don't really ever have any other Quadua events coming up right away. We are hosting here at Glen Haven, the 1st of June, a group viewing of Coyote's invocational writing workshop. That is available to those of you who would like to come and join us here. It is $100 off for those of you who are here, or $50 off if you're at another remote location. So that's been passed on to us as a group discount.
Pause there. Let me add a few words on that. The invocational writing course. This is very timely because a lot of us are trying to bring through information. And the best way to do that is to tap into your higher essence and to tap into that void we've just been talking about. And to invoke that higher essence, that higher spirit, while you write. And I'm sure Coyote will describe it very differently and probably more elegantly. But that's how I think of it with my simplified rocket scientist warrior mind. So I'm looking forward to this class. Even though I do some of this while I'm writing, I'm sure I can get better. So I'm taking it, and I highly recommend it. I guess that's it for tonight. All right? Do good, avoid evil, and if you can't avoid it, kick its rear end.
Thank you.
All right.
So